Welcome to the Penny Stamps Distinguished Speaker Series. My name is Christina Hamilton, the series director. For the fourth installment of our fall series, today we come to you direct from the Wasserman Projects in Eastern Market. Currently, the gallery here is hosting a major group show, Never Normal, a collaboration with the design collective Form and Seek. Never Normal is an exhibition that expresses the ever-changing viewpoint of the designer's perspective on the built world. This exhibition upholds Detroit as a platform for new and experimental design, featuring 30 artists and designers. Looking away from the conventional means of solving problems, the works in this exhibition seek to re-examine and re-evaluate our personal relationships to our domestic landscape. Through craft and making, these designers are able to express value, preciousness, and care that offer intuitive moments of clarity on contemporary issues in response to the needs of society in flux. Great news is that if you are here in the Detroit area, Wasserman Projects is pleased to present the opportunity for you to experience this show in person. They have carefully reopened their doors to the public for private scheduled viewings. Please note, visits are limited to a maximum of either 4 persons or a single household at a time, so go to their website for full details and schedule your viewing, wassermanprojects.com. Today, we host a conversation with Bilge Noor Saltik, founder of Form and Seek, Aaron Blendowski, artist and designer, and Allison Wong, director and curator of Wasserman Projects. They will discuss the concept and development of Never Normal, and you will also get to meet a handful of other makers in the show speaking about their work along the way. So welcome to Wasserman Projects, and now turning it over to your host, Allison Wong.
Thank you, Christina, so much, and to University of Michigan for including us in the Penny Stamp Speaker Series. I'm incredibly excited to broadcast here from Wasserman Projects, and we just opened this incredible exhibition, Never Normal. As Christina mentioned, we are here in Eastern Market. Wasserman Projects has been open in this location since 2015. So just here on the heels of our 5-year anniversary. And since we've been in this location, we have been committed to promoting the absolute finest of art, design, and music, always trying to facilitate projects that might not otherwise be possible. And this absolutely is one of those shining examples. This exhibition was brought together in collaboration with Form and Seek. So I'm going to pass this over to Bilge Noor Saltik to talk a little bit about Form and Seek and her background.
Thank you, Allison. My name is Bilge Noor Saltik. I'm the founder and director of Form and Seek. Form and Seek is a design studio. Started as a collective, actually. We started creating shows, and then 3 years ago, we joined the design studio part as well. In Form and Seek Studio, we create and curate uniquely crafted products. We are focused on product design and installation, and we've been collaborating and curating different shows over the last 7 years.
Fantastic. Thank you, Noor. And we also have to my right here, Aaron Blendowski, artist and designer.
Awesome. Thanks for having me. As Allison said, my name is Aaron Blendowski. I'm a local independent designer, mostly furniture, sculpture objects, graphic design, and I've been living and working in the area for the last, going on 20 years now, showing design work here and wanting to just see this growth that's currently happening.
And tell us about the core group of 5 that organized this exhibition.
Sure. So again, it started with this kind of like ad hoc meetup. I think it started actually, we were meeting at another person's design studio. We had met each other and shown together before in another Form and Seek show, Substance, last year.
Yes.
And so Nora and I started speaking. I relayed information to Evan back to, I guess, like some other folks, and then back to you, because you guys are now working together. Sophie and you had worked together previously, and then Karen kind of came into the mix, which brought in this like whole new kind of group of youngsters from Cranbrook, a mix with like the rest of us from Cranbrook and from all over the place, and U of M and LTU. So it was a perfect storm of the five of us really getting together and being able to start to see what it would look like to put a show together.
Absolutely. And then, Ender, can you speak a little bit to the history of Form and Seek and this now annual exhibition that you've been putting on for over the last 7 years? Essentially?
Yes. Well, Form and Seek came together. I studied in London at Royal College of Art, and actually Form and Seek started in London. So when you're a newly graduate, well, I'll start here. Designers need to show their work to launch their careers and showcase their work. And it was going through these big design shows, which was very expensive to show on your own as a solo. So when we first graduated, we had an idea of showing together, sharing the cost. After our first show in Istanbul in 2013, we realized it actually works being together, and then it's our work complement each other, and we were able to actually get prime spots in big design shows, and we continued. So since 2013, well, group grow as well. So far in the 17 shows that Form and Seek organize, we work with plus 100 designers from 25 different countries. So we started, back then I was in Europe, so we started having shows in Milan or London Design Week, and then it's grown to coming to North America. We had a show in New York, and then I moved to Detroit. And then this is actually my second year being based in here. And we had a great show, like Erin mentioned, last year. And yeah, and then came into doing a show with you, which I'm very happy about.
Thank you. The whole roster of the designers in this exhibition were more or less established. But when we had that initial conversation, what was so important in terms of this collaboration was that it rang true to Wasserman Projects and our mission here. And so with that, Form and Seek and the collaborative group had really put their trust in me to assume the role of the lead curator and meet with all of the different designers, making the final selections for the show and the exhibition design. And on top of that, one of the other caveats that they were so willing to cooperate with us on is that I wanted it to have a conversation with Wasserman Projects past as well, our existing roster of artists. So in addition to the 23 designers in the exhibition, we also added 7 artists that had exhibited or had a relationship with us here at Wasserman Projects in the past. You know, we talk about this moment that we're in our history and how we've been so isolated from one another. It was an opportunity to bring a huge group of people together, artists, designers, creatives, and kind of welcome back a family and welcome new members into this family for this exhibition. I wanted to highlight in particular one of the artists, Mirella Zacharias. Her background is as a muralist, originally from Mexico City and now based in New York and Mexico. We did a major exhibition with her work about 2 years ago, and she created an entire conversation in response to the city of Detroit. Mm-hmm. She pulled a lot of inspiration from the Rivera murals at the DIA. And so it was a great way to bring back those moments of the conversation, the way it connects to the people of this city, the people that we're presenting these exhibitions for. So it was really wonderful to see that all come together. And so speaking of collaboration, you know, I think all of us agree that really all of the best projects grow out of this collaborative effort. And this exhibition is a perfect example.
Yeah, definitely.
I think we involved so many different players in this. And obviously, you know, this collaboration with University of Michigan and Penny Stamps, I think that, we also have so many great designers that come out of the legacy and history of Cranbrook Academy of Art, out of the 3D design department, as well as many other departments at Cranbrook. We have former students, alums, and faculty from Lawrence Tech University, from also College for Creative Studies, Eastern Michigan University. We're really pulling from all of these different areas throughout Detroit. And so not just with the organizational and institutional collaborations, we also have a really exciting interview and video to share by some of the collaborative design teams. There's quite a few design collectives that have participated in this exhibition. So we are going to go and visit Karen Lee.
My name is Karen Lee, and I am a designer of communal objects. I have a collaborator that I work with named Brett Evans, and we collaborated on this piece together called Snail Home. It's really interesting. A lot of our work talks to some of these ideas like ambiguity and openness, and also the felt experience of objects. Our work also speaks to the way that we collaborate together and how we both bring very separate energies to the table when we collaborate. So having me as a designer, I have a very specific way that I drive my process, and the way that Brett comes to the table with his more ceramic specific energy, he comes to the table with his own sort of process, and it becomes a really interesting combination of energies in the way that we try to come together and produce this object. So this piece is the first piece that Brett and I collaborated on. It's called Macaroni for Every Being. And basically, Brett and I were working through some of these ideas around ambiguity, as well as oscillation, and also thinking about what it means to have a plurality of objects that don't necessarily speak to us, or nor do we speak to them. It's almost like they have their own, the objects themselves are the ceramics that are coexisting in their own sort of other world that's separate from a human's perspective or human's world. And so Brett and I like to think about this idea that's called object-oriented ontology, which basically speaks to the idea that everything in this world is an object. And so if you take away the idea of a subject, such as a person or a consumer or an onlooker, what does that mean when an object can kind of live separately from the makers or the people who have created the objects themselves? So there's a lot of ideas around ambiguity as well, and how that enters into the idea of the person who's wanting to use the object but not quite sure how to, and then it becomes sort of this open-ended experience of this, what could be considered a low table. So in this piece, Snail Home, it is made up of a combination of different materials. We have powder-coated steel as the frame with this sort of wormy form, and then we have this sort of resin-coated ceramic that Brett had made for the shelving. And this piece definitely talks to the sort of felt experience of objects, and sort of kind of also letting the object itself be this sort of open piece where there are all these sort of like nooks and crannies that the user could, even though there is some sort of specificity to it, there's also some sort of openness to it, so that the end user could ultimately place whatever object that they want into some of these open holes, or some of these like little crevices and compartments that are sort of embedded within this sort of ceramic shelf.
Thank you so much. It's so great to hear directly from the artist, from Karen Lee and her collaborative works with Brett Evans. So, it's one thing to celebrate collaboration when it's all said and done. We're now in a finished exhibition space. But, I want to talk about a little bit of the behind the scenes. What does it mean to collaborate, and how do you do it? I think that it's not this, it's not a simple thing.
No.
There's a lot of aspects to it, and I think we went through all the highs and lows together. So
Yes.
I want to hear from you how you feel about this collaboration and collaboration in general.
You want to start? You want me to?
Go ahead.
Okay, I could jump in a little bit, maybe just kick it off. I think collaboration is one of those things that, it's a sliding scale. I think there's you collaborate as artists, you collaborate as planners, you collaborate as a designer, you collaborate as a writer, and each one of those facets is different, because I think one thing that you learn about collaboration, personally, you learn what your strong suits are and what your weaknesses are. I think that just like inherently happens when you're collaborating. But when you're pulling off a bigger show like this, you realize it can't be done with 2, it can't be done with 3, it's not usually done with 4 or 5, and it's like it took all of your team, it took all of our team, it took all of the designers cooperating. So there was collaboration on top of collaboration in this. And anybody who has ever put on a design show knows that each time it's different. It's totally different.
Yeah.
So I think the collaboration really allows you to manage your own personal expectations of yourself and of others. And you're working towards something that's a common goal. And that can be like a moving, shifting shape, as we saw, because it was like, is it with Wasserman? We don't know. What space are we going to use? Okay, we'll just keep rolling. We got this list of people. It's going to be great. And then we found the space, and it kept kind of moving.
I'm a strong, obviously, I mean, I've been doing this for a long time, but I'm a strong believer of the collaboration. And I believe the work that you put together complements each other and it elevates. So that's why over the 7 years, we're trying to create a platform to elevate each other's work. And I would say it's a lot of work, as we all know. It's a lot of managing, but like Erin said, you understand your strengths and things that you don't know, and collaboration actually helps you draw a complete picture. Mm-hmm. This show is, in terms of scale, so big and so diverse that it needed all those voices to be able to complete it. And also the team we selected was so diverse. You need a collective of designers and artists like this roster that you to be able to explain a complete story. Over the years, I learned a few things through collaborating, and it's and never fails to surprise me. It's a lot of work. It's also a lot of planning. You need to know your list of things that you need to do, and everyone requires a different communication level, all designers. But what is important, and you see in this show as well, that all the voice are heard in the exhibition and in the collaboration. If it's done well, then you see everyone's colors in the show. And I think we accomplished it in the Never Normal show.
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree more. I think with so many moving components, we were able to still find that right balance with all of the different parties that we were working with. And I think there's so many other collaborators peripherally too that are part of this conversation. And Nur, you said it in terms of communication. I think communication and ultimately what you build towards in those collaborative relationships is trust.
Yeah.
So I feel really lucky to have gone through that with the two of you and all of the artists and designers in this exhibition. That's a great kind of segue into also how we came to establish this exhibition once Wasserman Projects became the host location for it. One of the things that is always important to me is getting to know all of the participating artists and designers in a context to not just the work that is in the exhibition, but their entire practice as a whole. And that required a lot of communication and built a lot of trust.
Yeah, it's actually different for general design shows, and I want to actually highlight that. So if you're organizing a design show, it's mostly a shorter period of time, and you propose a design, and no one actually spends as much time as Allison as curator to understand your practice. And I believe it was a valuable moment because in the midst of COVID, which creating alone on your own and not even being able to go into a studio, we get to discuss and go deep down in these concepts that we are developing and how the design works in the context of the theme. So I think it was quite valuable We did a lot of studio visits, social distanced, with masks on.
And many via Zoom.
Many
as
via
well.
Zoom, yeah. This show actually has a lot of international designers in it as well, I would say. But one studio visit I want to mention is the Michael Neville visit. It was one of my first. We, as a team, we did, well, Alison go on all 30 designer visits. As a team, we divided the work. I've been to Michael Neville's and Studio Heron's visit, but Michael's one was particularly specific because it was so early on testing the materials. We were looking at little samples, and then as a designers, we can all imagine how it's going to grow and become a product, but it was special to witness to see how it's actually grown, and we brainstorm in the studio to how it can be shaped. It was quite nice to experience.
Another artist that's really great to talk about in terms of the development of this studio visit to the final exhibition is Simon Anton. I was familiar with his work through his collaborative Thing prior to meeting with him, but never really had a conversation with him about his independent work. We had a great visit. He shared with me some of the functional objects that he had been creating and this branch into more fine art and non-functional sculpture. During our visit, he actually had just recently purchased a truckload full of raw chip plastic material that he uses in his work, and was able to show me the back of this 12-foot box truck, the actual raw material, and that sparked the conversation for creating the installation that he did here for Never Normal. And I think it could not have turned out better. It was so above and beyond what I had expected, and I think that wouldn't have been possible had we not had this kind of dialogue. So I'm just, I really cherish those moments of being able to talk about the ideas and the process and the history of each and every one of the designers' works.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think on that same note, seeing that become a more available option when you're putting on design shows, like the ability to talk with a curator and not just your design friends, it offers up so much more to be able to talk through different options. So like two for myself to bring up would be my own personal studio visit with Alison, which was very comfortable after knowing her for 16 years now. We still arrive at new options. We still talk through new ideas. And it pushes me out of my comfort zone, but she might also see something totally different just through a curatorial eye than I would through my being in the studio, staring at something for endless amount of time to get new fresh eyes on it, fresh opinions on it that are not necessarily designer. It's extremely helpful. And then you pair that up against, and that happened just down the street. And then you pair that up against with a studio visit that we did with Seon-hee Kim in South Korea via Skype, through email, and all these other different kind of factions to piece things together. We saw that there was interesting things in her practice that we needed to consider on our end as we were installing the work. And that is another challenge, aside from getting the work, is also installing it and seeing how these works not only exist in the studio, but then have to, they have to live in that immortalized picture. And the curator ends up being very responsible for that picture at the end of the day, or that image, or that way that the work exists. So to see it on screen in South Korea and then have it show up here and have to unpack it and understand it and decipher.
Quite surreal.
Yeah, so quite surreal to understand then a designer's language, not just their formal language or formal vocabulary, but how they package something or ship or send or explain the installation. So.
Yeah, I think it was a huge learning experience for Sunny. And I think it was, again, kind of going back to that conversation about trust. I mean, she put an incredible amount of trust in me and us as a team to be able to handle her works and read her instructions, and to translate that. And that's something that she hadn't done in her practice before. So that was a really exciting and big step for her. Speaking of other exciting and big steps, Nur, you took on something really ambitious for this exhibition.
Yeah.
I think everyone was so excited with this massive space to play in.
Definitely.
But Nur, what I'm sitting on right now in Deviation Space is your physically largest project to date. So
Yeah.
why don't you share a little bit about your process with us?
I want to talk about a little bit about background. I am originally Turkish, so through my career, I traveled a lot. So studied in London, I showed in Asia, Europe, like it was quite a lot of traveling. So I tend to make small stuff. So I think it was in my back brain consciousness that I didn't realize, but I was doing things that I can carry because shipping can be tricky, right? Especially I was doing a lot of glass work. And for this show, it's kind of resonated because we're talking about this domestic landscapes. When I started thinking about this show, I was stuck in my little apartment in Ann Arbor back then. And then I realized with my husband, the surfaces are shifting. So we're working on a couch, we're working on the table, but like it's all deviating into one long surface. And I realized our footprint actually non-existent in our living room, like kind of having these loops. So the deviation space came to life. So it's like different heights of surfaces interlocked each other into unlimited actually versions. So you can actually create your own high desk, like Allison sitting, or a tabletop or a bench. You can lean down. So it was showing that in a small amount of space, how creative we needed to be. I want to talk about another thing, which was collaboration. I traveled a lot, so I don't have my own studio most of the time. And now I'm establishing one in here, but over the years, I rely on different partners, manufacturing partners to make my work. With glass pieces, I work with a craftsman in Istanbul, with ceramics is another one. And I had to actually create a dialogue for this piece for a new maker in Detroit, which was another challenge because then it's a balance of trust, understanding each other. There's another relationship level there, which I think it turned out quite successfully. So I grew up a collaboration as well as a work.
Yeah, I mean, it's really important to mention all of the things that go into creating an exhibition, being able to work with local Detroit-based fabricators, so many of which contributed to the various pieces in this exhibition, to industrial, to fine craftsmen, to studio assistants. And I know, Aaron, you took advantage of some studio assistant help as well, finishing a major project for you that had been in the works for a number of years.
Yep. Yeah. So on that note, let me talk about one thing and then jump back into my work. And I think that is really quickly, because I know we'll come back to it. The Never Normal prompt allowed each designer to work kind of in a separate area, right? And I think that allowed everybody to approach it with a different set of processes in mind or a different set of end goals. Personally, for me, working with Adam Franzel as like my studio assistant, who's been instrumental in helping me make this like recent batch of work, one of which was ongoing, and then another one specifically new for the show. It allowed me to come at it from definitely a more artistic approach. I wasn't looking from the scientific approach. I wasn't looking at it from how we live. But for me, my Never Normal approach was the psychology behind what normal is. And so with more time, I could dive deeper into like the psychology behind each piece, but each piece is thematic to this series called the Voyager series, which a lot of people think is about escape or escaping into another world when things are not so good here. It's only partially about that. Really what the Voyager series is about is the reconnaissance of disappearing for a minute. And I think that we all just disappeared for 6 months. And I think we are now coming back out of it. And so for me, that work is about reconnaissance, and it is about like what you bring back from these deeper dives into the psychology behind normality or or what is normal in the first place. Yeah, and I think that's my work. I think that's one of the things that I really appreciated about this is seeing everybody's perspective or vantage point on the concept. It's not always that a theme allows for that, but in certain cases it does. And with this one, it really did.
Absolutely. And I think, so often people don't see everything that goes into making an exhibition like this, or making the individual pieces that are a part of it. I'm going to take us to Donut Shop, who are going to be talking about a piece they created for this exhibition that was very much so a response to our current times in light of COVID-19.
My name is Jacob Saphir,
And I'm Ian Klippa.
and we run the studio Donut Shop in Detroit.
Jake and I met in school at Stamps and started making things together when we were students there, and actually ended up living together our senior year. And then when we graduated, we moved to Detroit and started a studio, which is called Donut Shop. And we specialize in furniture design and work with all sorts of different clients, from businesses and restaurants to consumers, direct to like people's houses. And I've also been dabbling with creating our own line of objects.
So we both have a background in wood and metalworking, as well as a little bit of engineering. And so those are the materials that we typically work with. And we design and build everything in our shop that is located within Detroit, Michigan. This project in particular was actually a bit of a departure from that process because it involves materials that we don't typically use. And I think in light of current events, we were kind of wanting to explore those different materials and change things up in our shop. And so that was part of the initial direction in terms of choosing materials.
The piece actually derives its name, miasma mirror, from obsolete medical theory. And the theory was that you could get sickness simply by smelling it or being exposed to smell as opposed to germ. So we thought it would be interesting to take this theory that's obsolete now and kind of mash it with the DIY dividers that we're seeing pop up at point of sales, in offices, at schools.
Yeah, I think one of the points we were trying to make with this piece, in particular, looking back at how past pandemics had affected the cities and the social environments and the landscapes that were involved in those, was that you see these major changes happen afterwards. And so one of the things that we wanted to kind of flag was that these kind of plastic dividers that you're seeing popping up that were hung by fishing wire or screwed down with 2x4s or things like that was this very Band-Aid solution, when especially it comes at a time when we're kind of needing these very pivotal shifts, and with climate change and with our environments and with disease. And so it's kind of just this way to step back and think about how there might be other ways to address these kind of things that are going on in the world, and not just take the easiest route, and the one that seems the cheapest, and the one that seems like it's more profit driven than really driven by the safety of the people that are living in these environments.
Yeah, to kind of build off that idea, if you look at sort of the results of pandemics in the past and the way that creatives and the way that architects and engineers have dealt with these issues, even with kind of a limited amount of knowledge. So the miasma theory was the prevailing medical theory up until the end of the 19th century. But within that period, cities were actually rebuilt, and it went from like dank, wooden, kind of dark corridors to being these much broader open streets. A good example is Paris and the renovation that happened in the 1830s. And that was a direct result of enacting change based on the medical theory. And even though what they thought was not entirely correct, it still had a really positive outcome in the health of its citizens. by adding a lot of air and space and light into cities. So what we're trying to do is not actually present a solution, but kind of flag the incompleteness between the relationship of what could be and what is, like what we could be doing at this time, at this really pivotal, absurd time, and what we're actually seeing and what it's amounted to.
So for us, I think what that kind of boiled down to was to create this divider that was just, more of a fine art piece that was completely ornate and unrealistic as an actual solution, just so that it created that side by side of these fishing wire, plastic, acrylic dividers that are just being thrown about everywhere, and something that you would spend far too much money on to do a mediocre job in actually protecting people. Yeah.
To go one step further, the processes as well. So if you're looking at these kind of DIY dividers that are popping up that are often made of tape or stock lumber or a sheet of plexiglass or something, this is kind of far from that in terms of processes that were used to make it. So the metal material itself is plate aluminum. They used a CNC water jet cutter to make the actual profile, which we designed in a CAD program. Then the edges were all hand routed in our shop. Then the whole thing was brought to a high polish. And then the way it's actually attached to these through bolts was the bolt pattern was laid out on a manual mill and then kind of painstakingly machined so it all fits together. The plexiglass part, Jake could go into a little bit more detail about, but we took a little bit of inspiration from the designer Shiro Kuramata as well, who has a famous piece with roses embedded into the arms of a chair. So we were trying to emulate that and learned a lot about how difficult and touchy the process is. So there's different parts of the process, different steps. So we started off by making a circular mold and pouring. Well, we started off by doing a lot of different tests, but when we finally did this piece, we made a circular mold and then did a half pour. And then right when the is it epoxy got to a certain amount of thickness, we embedded the flowers in one by one and then had to supervise it for multiple hours to get all the bubbles out of it, as many as we could. And then we let it cure to a certain point and then did the second pour over top of it, which got it pretty close to where it is. But then we actually had to end up sanding off and refinishing the entire thing to get the level of finish that we wanted, which was a difficult part because it went from being transparent to actually back to a totally opaque surface. And then we had to bring it back to the polish to make it transparent again. So a lot of time went into it in a way that you certainly wouldn't see with the dividers that go up in a liquor store or a hardware store or something.
Thanks again, and Jake. It is such a great example of how designers are constantly interpreting and responding to the world around us. I think, Nur, maybe you have a few things to share, because it's not simply just about what's happening right in this moment.
No.
I think the approach to design and the philosophy behind it permeates through so many different areas and topics of focus for each of the designers in this show.
Yeah, definitely. And when we come up with the Never Normal theme and designers in this show responded to that, we were thinking about a general theme under, obviously we're in the midst of global pandemic, but it was more about the designer roles and how, well, there's a hip word that's the new normal. It's actually, and our reaction was it's actually never normal, which as a designer, in our practices, we shouldn't get used to things and see them as normal. And our job is based on our observation, adaptation, understanding what's going on in the world, and understanding the key pain points and creating a reaction and designs for that. So through that conversations, all of the brief, the line came together, and then when we actually invited designers, they all responded differently to that. Like whether it's environmental or material or a domestic landscape. So it's created a diversity. This shows actually it's not about now, but it's about a designer's general reaction to normal, shall I say? I don't know. Our location also, Detroit, is never normal as well, I would say.
Of course.
Yeah, I mean, I think it is a really interesting time, and this is one little snippet of the design ecosphere, right? I mean, all the industries are changing because of what's going on in the world right now. Every industry is going to change. All the design professions are going to change. We're going to see some for the good and some for the bad. I mean, everything is going to have to adapt to this moment. So the show does look at the past. It does look at the future, but it is a response to what's going on right now. And I think
Sure.
that oftentimes when we talk about like a change in time or a pivotal moment, we zoom in on that moment like it's a singularity, right? It's not. It's never a singularity. The impact of change is actually thousands and hundreds of thousands and millions of things happening all at once around us. And I think that for us to even try to pull this show together is a part of that. I think we talked even at the opening about how easy it would have been to take a year off and not try to put together any shows or to do anything. Yeah. And I think like that change right there is that there is a reason to keep moving forward. There is a different future that lies ahead, even though it seemed like we were on the tracks for it before all of this happened. We saw what the future held, and now we really don't know, and we don't know if that's a bad thing or a good thing, but it's certainly not reason to sit back idle and wait. And I think that was
I think there's so many overlapping conversations with all of the designers and artists in the exhibition. I mean, even Adrian Wong talking about production. We have, so many artists like Simon and Cody and Mark talking about environmental issues, Donut Shop as well, as they mentioned. I think there's a lot of commentary on industrial processes and materials, like Nick and Joe and Extents. We have a number of conversations around the domestic and our everyday. And I would include Hayden and Dee and Phoebe and Irina in that conversation as well. Attention to surfaces like Jung Han and Michael. I think that there's also a social component to this, a way of finding connection within our community with one another. And I think E&D Studio does that really well with working with their community to do this pop-up repair shop. And I think that accessibility is something that I think we're all looking for right now. I think that's a great way to introduce also a new venture that we launched timed with the Never Normal exhibition is Wasserman Works, which is an online retail shop that includes select Never Normal designers' works, all packable, shippable at friendly prices that are available right now, as opposed to waiting the full run of the exhibition. And some of the designers made some really exciting new explorations to include in Wasserman Works, including Evie Berle, who we have some behind the scenes of those test processes to show you here.
Hi, my name is Ebitinyefa Baralai. I'm a sculptor, ceramist, and designer. Currently, I teach at the College for Creative Studies in the ceramics department there. And I guess I'll talk a little bit about my work here. I would say, generally speaking, I'm interested in blending the aesthetics of craft and design, specifically as it relates to Yoruba and West African and Nigerian abstraction, specifically with these motif and cell pieces. I'm kind of thinking about Dinkra and Sibidi patterns and symbols and pictographs, and kind of borrowing that language of like lines and form to produce my own pictographs in the form of these wall pieces. I've deliberately chosen to leave the clay fired raw so that you're really able to see the texture and the surface quality of it in articulating these lines and forms that I've produced. The piece to the left here, titled Contacts, I produced it while I lived in San Francisco. I'm really drawn to the kind of intimacy that we have with ceramic objects, whether they be bowls or cups or even toilets. And in this series was really thinking about bringing that intimacy from the domestic space into the public space in San Francisco. I live in the Tenderloin neighborhood, and because of the big homeless population in that neighborhood, I would oftentimes see things just kind of strewn about the street, and it got me thinking about how these things, which to me look like trash, are potentially the intimate possessions of people who actually dwell on the sidewalk and dwell outside. And so in thinking about kind of reversing this intimacy with clay, I wanted to create objects that I would use to map my neighborhood. The kind of light glazed rings and the dark glazed rings here, they're somewhat abstractions of my left and right foot. And I just went around my neighborhood placing these pieces, going across streets, on the sidewalk, in front of businesses as a way to kind of engage my neighborhood that I hadn't before, as a way to kind of almost like measure the Tenderloin, but using a unit of measurement that is entirely focused on making, and particularly the material of clay, rather than on, numbers. For Wasserman Works, I wanted to actually revisit a piece that's been in development for several years now, almost close to a bit over a decade, with the Miles series. So this design was originally sculpted in oil clay back when I was in undergrad, and at the time the form was slip cast in porcelain. And I was a little kind of bothered, just kind of wondering if there'd be ways to remove some of the slight imperfections that I noticed in the cast because of the seams that were present in the mold that I would, carve away and sand away. But I figured what would be ideal is if there'd be a way for me to actually print the form rather than have it cast in a series of different phases. And I'd heard about 3D printing. I hadn't really done much 3D printing at that time, but I went ahead with getting the form digitally scanned way back then, and then just kind of sat on the idea, because even though I knew what needed to be done at the time because of the cost of 3D printing and just where I was in my life, it just didn't seem conducive. So fast forward to my time now at the College of Creative Studies at CCS in the ceramics department. I had a little bit more experience with 3D printing in general and saw an opportunity to invest in bringing a 3D printer to the department. And then probably about like a semester after that, when Wasserman Works and this exhibition popped up, saw the opportunity to revisit this specific piece. And at first, when you're working on an old design or when you're working on an old concept, the temptation was to think about the idea in the context of my mindset then. So the piece is called Miles, and I'm a big fan of jazz music, and the form is kind of evocative of the notes and styles of one of my favorite jazz musicians, Miles Davis. So it was interesting for me kind of going back into this mindset of who I was back then, but also kind of in a kind of refreshed way, rediscovering and re-engaging the concepts and the ideas there. But then now, being able to address the process in a way that I couldn't back then. So with a 3D printer, it might seem like you just kind of load a file, push go, and boom, there it is. The thing with clay is that it's always moving. There's always this dialogue and relationship to like what it is, the nature of how it is in that moment, and what your intentions and your choices are. And this comes through in very specific ways when you're hand building, as well as when you're working on a potter's wheel, so when you're wheel throwing. And it came through here as well. You know, the veil of technology didn't remove the kind of vulnerability that the material has to its circumstances. And for me, making this piece while revisiting this series was kind of a dance in understanding the printer, understanding the material anew, and understanding the form anew, because each element, each one of those factors brought a different kind of dynamic to realizing this for Wasserman Works that had to be known and worked through for what it was. The main thing is kind of understanding the clay. It's a more wet clay, and it's a form that kind of tapers out. So building from the bottom up the way the printer does, a couple of things are important to keep an eye on. The speed of the print. If the bed's moving too fast, or the printer head's moving too fast, it'll literally shake itself out and destroy itself. So everything needed to be slowed down. And even when I slowed the print down a little bit, just the movement of the print itself as it would get higher and higher in its level would add ripples to the design. At first I thought there's something wrong with the printer, or there's something wrong with the model, but no, the piece was actually swaying as it printed, and I needed to account for that either by slowing the print down even further or by tweaking the tweaking the dimensions. And this was it was interesting for me to kind of come across these, almost like I can describe them as being stumbling blocks, but at the same time embrace them as being a part of the thumbprint or the journey of what would make these prints unique, not only for me, but specifically for Wasserman Works, because this series was really inspired, or rather the development of this series to this degree was inspired by this specific project. Yeah.
So thanks, Abby. We're so excited to have your vases in Wasserman Works. It's such a crazy and interesting time trying to navigate the world and to do everything we can to find that personal connection. So we are here at Wasserman Projects straddling between this virtual and online world, as well as in person, taking visits and still being active as a brick and mortar. But I'm curious, with the two of you, with your pulse on design, what do you think is next? What's next for you?
I think it's interesting, though. This time is a great opportunity. I am actually excited to think our behaviors are changing, our environments are changing, we're adapting. It's a great opportunity for designers as observers to get back to work and understand our new experiences, user experiences, and design objects for that. I personally look at form and culture and how the objects around us affect us and how they live in our environment. So I believe this is a perfect time. I'm actually, at first everyone goes like, oh, it's heavy, but after you process it, after you understand, and after you see how people adapted it and needs to change, like all the crosses we have and the plastic shields, we gotta do something about it as designers. Some of it's gonna stay, some of it needs to be developed, and I think it's a great opportunity for everyone, young designers, our colleagues, to start reshaping our environment.
Yeah, I would agree. And I mean, instead of taking this time to talk about what's next for myself, I'm actually really excited about what is next for the design profession, because I think that will change as much as our environment. I mean, everything around us is created by creative people, from fashion to automotive design to consumable goods, you name it. A creative person put their mark on it. I think a lot of the problems that creatives created over the last 100 years will now have to actually reverse engineer. So our field as creatives will be held a lot more responsible for all of our actions, because creative people really do have one of the largest voices because they're carrying the voice for so many people at once, whether it's consumers or prosumers or end users, or however you want to talk about the type of design work you're doing. Even fine design or ad hoc design or design that straddles the line between artistic expression and pure production ones. I think we all have to take a long look at the field and see how it shifts and adapts to the future. I think we're finally in a position where we can say comfortably, we actually don't have the answers for what the future holds. And I think up until March of this year, it felt a lot easier to say that we did have the answers because we saw a trajectory of how things were going. And this just changed so many things. And it has also opened the door for a lot of not only the pandemic type related changes, but societal changes. So I think this is going to be hopefully a revolutionary moment in time that we can look back and see that this is maybe when the design profession started to take more responsibility for its actions and how it actually shifts and changes culture from a capitalist viewpoint, which is not always so bad. A lot of people think capitalism is bad. A whole other lecture maybe, or talk. But how we actually take responsibility for that, because we are, creatives are key players in that system. And I think we have a lot of responsibility there.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Go ahead, Norm.
Sorry, I want to add something, and this actually shows, like, not only you're talking about taking responsibilities, taking responsibility about the material we use, taking responsibility about like the forms we put out, like products, installation, built environment. But also we're realizing that it's not only the objects or scaled pieces that we design, but it's also how we consume them. People understand them needs to be designed. And this period actually showed us, like, how do you go to a design show now is completely different than a year ago, right? And it's particularly exciting because we get to design all of those steps as well, which was norms and which was very box type, that this was done this way, right? Now, like, we're all figuring things out, and it's actually brought the human out of people. So it's actually easier to make mistakes and correct them and then continue. I think it's like more agile process is coming our way, which I'm excited about.
I think there's a lot to be hopeful and optimistic about in our future in general, but also in the context of art and design and culture. I invite everyone to schedule an appointment to come see all of these incredible works in person. You can visit our website at wassermanprojects.com or go straight to the booking at nevernormal.eventbrite.com. And make sure to check out the full selection of works at wassermanworks.com. I hope that this Never Normal exhibition, to me, it is so full of positivity and joy. And I think it's exactly what we all needed at this moment. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.